Okay.
Well, very warm welcome to everybody to the 46th meeting of Soteria. We have, I think, the 16th of June 2024.
That's right.
And Stead is going to introduce either a blind date or an alternative. And yeah, my pleasure. Hand over to you, Stead.
Yeah, thank you. It's a bit disconcerting to come to an event without knowing what's going to take place. But with this one, at least one has a say in what we're going to do. Or of course, if neither of the alternatives appeal, everyone is free to leave and do something more interesting, do some gardening. There are two options. One is the beginning of a well-known author's first novel. This is set in the countryside. I think it's in Nottinghamshire, and it has some agreeable descriptions of nature, and it will be charting relationships as they develop in the story. That was what I was intending to offer today. But the other week when I was up in Yorkshire, a friend of mine with whom I'd studied fine art at the Royal Academy got in touch with me and sent a link to his website and asked me to give some opinions on it, and also one of the essays that he's put on the website. I'm a big admirer of his work. I've been to exhibitions and seen it face to face, which I think is very important with paintings. It's a different experience looking at a photograph of it. And he's a cultured man, very well read in the classics, and his essay I found very illuminating about what is beneath the surface of quite simple representative paintings, particularly still lifes in his case, which he specializes in. And I thought it would be a nice thing to read. It's a well-written essay, and before we do it, if that's what we choose to do, we could have a look at a couple of his paintings quite quickly on the website, and maybe one of them to which the essay relates, we could revert back to it at the end just to see whether it's altered our perception of it. So, who's for the first novel set in Nottinghamshire? Perhaps raise the finger. So that's a definite 2. And who is for the essay about painting?
I want to see the painting.
1, 2, 3. And I think I probably am in favour of that, because this is something slightly unusual that Mick, I don't think you voted.
No, either way, really. They both sound quite interesting. So, maybe we can save the Nottinghamshire novel for another time. If
yeah, okay. So, Heward and Edith, would you be very averse to looking at pictures and seeing how it goes?
Can you tell us what the novel?
No, but he might want to keep it for another time.
Yeah. I think
now I'm dying to know.
I mean, the idea of not saying the author and so forth is that we should read it with an unbiased mind, and to be able to, I think that
I've got an unbiased mind anyway, even if I know who it is.
Well, I think you should communicate that secretly.
I would like to know. Yeah. That's all.
Okay.
Well,
communicate it
secretly. You can send that to privately.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, you actually don't like not to know. You want to know in advance. Well, I can certainly do that, Edith. That's not that is not a problem. Okay, well, I shall line up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this should be good.
Well, isn't there a literary term about writing about art? And I'm trying to think, I can't remember how to pronounce it, ekphrastic or something like that.
Aesthetics? No, is that what you mean?
No, I'll think of it. I'll
Yes,
look it up.
indeed. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
That's
yeah. Now
fine.
this is quite a good illustration of Michael's work. Michael Sangster is the gentleman's name. He's got some, I don't know, form of long-sightedness, I think, and his pictures are much bigger than one would imagine. The objects always seem to sort of, yeah, the apples are really quite large. So that is an interesting element to his paintings when one sees them. The fact that the objects are quite large. We just have a brief look at a few of these.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
interesting.
he tends to paint objects, you know, that he has in the studio that he knows quite well that he's done. And this is a previous drawing cartoon. And this may well, yeah, I think we'll stop with this one because this is a painting which the essay illuminates, particularly in the shape of the cloth and the red bird. No, objection.
Is it my imagination or does it look like he's painting on tiles?
Yes, yeah.
No, that is because his the pictures tend to grow.
Oh, okay.
And he adds yeah, he adds other canvases to them. They start off and then he has to go bigger. So right now let's start with this. And Janine, would you like to
Yeah.
this essay we should be able to comfortably do it in the time. It's not that long.
Okay. Examples of interaction. Theoretical accounts of what great paintings are supposed to do or how they are supposed to act on the viewer often bear little relation to the actual experience of looking at them. These accounts can, in fact, become barriers, hindering a real encounter with the painting. Each time we look at a picture, it is a fresh experience. One could argue that at each fresh viewing, we should wipe our minds clean of previous experience and acquired knowledge in order to be alive to the seemingly inexhaustible potential within a painting. In this respect, a picture can be said to be never finished because there will never come a moment when we have understood the sum of all of its experiences. The enigma of the picture, which is its life, has no end. Are intellect and perception mutually exclusive? Can a true response to a picture only be intuitive? Or is it that a rather one-sided and romantic position to take? Although it is true that a person with an excessive amount of theoretical preconceptions can be prevented from seeing the picture, from responding to it spontaneously, it would be error to ignore the part that intellect plays in aesthetic experience. For example, the tree in a pot, so winning to the senses, in Bellini's allegorical Sacra, is enhanced immeasurably by the knowledge that it belongs to the tradition of tree of life motifs and to the wider realm of tree symbolism. The intellect thus provides a parallel cultural universe, or garden, in which fleeting sensations provoked by the image can recognize, as it were, where they come from, their origins, their parents. Another example, comes from personal experience as a painter. My wife had bought as a Christmas decoration a very lifelike red bird. From the first, I was drawn to this red bird, but I could not put that allure into words. In due course, I set up a still life with the red bird in it, and throughout the long course of its painting, I was none the wiser, absolutely certain in terms of perceiving what the red bird was, but absolutely incapable of putting that perception into words. Long after finishing the picture, I read in Hall's Dictionary of Subjects and Symbols in Art that a bird in pagan antiquity signified the soul of man that flew away at his death. At the precise moment of reading these words, there was an instant and unforeseen connection between the red bird of the still life and this older image idea of the bird as a universal symbol, going back to man's earliest times. It was a moment of profound consolation. I understood finally why the red bird had such an effect, as if something from the deep past of memorial potency had suddenly reappeared in the present. Intellectual knowledge can thus help root intuitive perception by providing knowledge of the hinterland or ancestry of an image that wakens rich but enigmatic feeling in us. The intellect gives this feeling a home, a family, and a family history. As a result, the feeling is stronger and more secure, not just here today and gone tomorrow in the flux of capricious mood changes, but generally rooted in tradition from which more enrichment will come. Although perception, intuition, and understanding intellect could be said, therefore, to be mutually beneficial, they appear to operate independently as two distinct capacities of the mind. That's interesting. Perception operates in a spontaneous, unpremeditated way, achieves fruition almost instantaneously, and is volatile. As soon as we try to catch hold of the perception in order to understand it, it vanishes, and no conscious effort of mind will induce it to return. Rather like the elusive nymphs of Greek mythology, who are constantly flitting away or changing into trees or water. In contrast to this aerial-like perception, the work of the intellect, the acquirement of knowledge, and the comprehension of the complexities therein, is laborious and slow. I mentioned that the realm of intellect can be seen as a garden, and continuing this analogy, intuitions or perceptions like seed or scent blowing around in the air need the intellect's garden for their parent ideas or schools of thought and belief to be rooted and tended. When an image idea finds its root stock, it becomes both more permanent and more progenitive. The contrast, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, perhaps Heward, you'd like to continue.
The contrast between the earthbound nature of the intellect and the volatile airborne qualities of perception is also demonstrated when perception affords us glimpses of things that we cannot name. On one level, we know and fully understand what these things are. It is just that that kind of knowledge does not translate itself into words. Although in a strange way, we are perfectly familiar with these things that only perception sees, it is as if they live high up on a mountain where words cannot go. Yet without words, logic, and the whole apparatus of the intellect, we would have built up no tradition, no repositories or stores of acquired knowledge, belief, and experience, no family tree of ideas. Who is to say which came first? The rich tradition of stories, religions, philosophies, and all the images, ideas, and sensations they contain, or the spontaneous awareness of significance in something seen that a painter can experience in the plain light of the present. which can seem like a personal inspiration. It may be, however, that rather than experiencing something new and privately creditable to him, the painter is instead opening himself to tradition, which speaks through him in oblique and unforeseeable ways. Another example from actual experience as a painter shows the same pattern, first the moment of perception, spontaneous, rapid, active of its own volition, rather than of the conscious will, followed much later by the intellect, via the process of reading, locating that perception's ancestor or archetype. I had for some time been trying to set up a still life. Most of it was in place, except the cloth. After many unsatisfactory attempts, the cloth fell in such a way that when I went back to the viewing area, I immediately saw that I had found what I was looking for, and the whole still life now had its own mysterious logic. Through the course of the painting, this cloth shape, resembling a mountain, never lost its vital stimulus. But as with the red bird, I could not articulate it verbally, could not account for it, and knew perfectly well what it was in some inaccessible part of my mind, but knew also that words would not be denied entry. Much later, the clue finally was given, again through reading. In his preface to Paradise Lost, C.S. Lewis discusses Milton's treatment of the final entry into paradise. Lewis writes, "And all this realm was studied once with rich and ancient cities, a pleasant soil. But the mountain of paradise, like a jewel set in gold, far more pleasant." At the instant of reading this passage, there was a similar moment of revelation as experienced with the red bird. The cloth mountain in the still life and the mountain of paradise of tradition merged. Ancient symbol and individual contemporary perception suddenly became one and the same in that moment. The intellect and perception, so often at odds with one another, were able to join in sudden consummation. I finally understood why the cloth mountain had so injured me.
Thanks very much. Maybe Edith, you could continue, please.
Coming home, the solace gained from such moments indicates a need to connect with the immemorial, the undying, the deeper truths. Lewis is characteristically lucid on these matters. He speaks of Milton's theme leading him to deal with certain very basic images in the human mind, and of the paradisal idea as it exists in our minds, as something coming through the particularities, some light which transfigures them. And later that Milton arouses our own imagination to find again in our own depth the paradisal light. These references, Lewis writes, to the obvious and the immemorial are there not to give us new ideas about the lost garden, but to make us know that the garden is found, that we have come home at last and reached the centre of the maze, our centre, humanity's centre, not some private centre of the poets. In this last comment, Lewis would seem to confirm my earlier suggestion that inspiration might not be a matter of personal invention, but something immemorially alive, speaking through one's own perception. It might seem quite a step to move from a personal account by a painter of his thoughts about painting to the profundity and majesty of Paradise Lost, but we are dealing with the same area of human sensibility, images, how they act upon us, and what they mean to us. And being human, we share, or have the potential to share, the same depth of experience and the same moments of fulfillment. So poet, painter, anybody can and do share certain very basic images in the human mind that can become images of poetry and power, images that seem to come from a great depth of time. In highlighting the differing roles of intellect and perception in aesthetic experience, it seems that we first come across these images through the agency of perception, which perceives and recognizes them, but cannot articulate them verbally. In turn, this leaves a feeling of incompleteness because that other side of us, the reflective, thoughtful, analytical side that loves to compare and consider and to find the proper place and context of things, has not yet caught up, leaving perception somehow incomplete, fugitive, and homeless.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to finish? Oh, Michael in France or London, perhaps you'd.
It's France, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, France.
The intoxication of the senses in the moment of perception, so easily forgotten or dismissed as fanciful, needs to be underlaid with something more permanent and enduring. This is the task of the intellect, and in the time-honored tradition of opposites attracting, perception, intuitive, and volatile longs for the stability and objectivity of the intellect, while the intellect, slow and careful, in turn longs for the headlong impetuosity and vitality of perception. It is the old mutual attraction and opposition that has reappeared under different guises throughout history, and one might say, in each individual soul. Apollo versus Dionysus, classicism versus romanticism, love versus chastity. Indeed, the essential duality of human nature. The sense of coming home, of plumbing the depths to find some original state of truth and integrity, the garden, that Lewis articulates seems to chime with the sense of solace and completeness felt on those rare occasions when the opposites, perception and intellect, are able to join. The workings of perception, however, remain mysterious. The intellect may, from time to time, unearth antecedents that prefigure the contemporary image object, but this is not guaranteed. The key thing is that perception instantly recognizes the poetic potency of an image and will sense its importance even if it cannot translate it. If in the course of time the intellect does, through reading, hit upon the ancestor or an ancestor of the image, and its genealogy is understood, we then experience a profound sense of completeness, as the airy spirit of perception is somehow linked to the earth, but we cannot always expect this happy marriage to happen. Symbol. The fact that perception does pick up on these veiled and mysterious sonorities coming to us from beyond our time conveys the sense that behind the bland surface of the present, there is depth, and hidden within that depth, riches. Life would seem poor and meager if, from time to time, some chance noticed thing catching the light in a particular way, a tree, a building, a fold in cloth, a flower, did not strike a chord or catch an echo from far-off days. We all long for depth of experience, and it is only when we are vouchsafed this that we feel complete and fulfilled. That perception is undeniable. It cannot be faked, and any attempt to do so leaves us feeling oddly ashamed, as if we have tried to besmirch something pure and unalloyed. We are visited by perception. We do not possess it. It comes to us, then goes free and independent like a spirit of the air. To use a phrase like spirit of the air in today's secular world is to invite ridicule, but the supernatural has always been with us. Religion, plays, myth, folktale, and story teem with supernatural events, such as the dove visiting the Virgin in the Annunciation, or Ariel, invisible but with a voice, flying hither and thither at Prospero's bidding in the Tempest. It is good to develop a skeptical turn of mind, but we are the poorer when our imaginative impulsivenesses it can no longer embellish our lives. Secularism, scientific and technological dominance can seem to drain the life out of the world. Yet the moments of perception still occur. Those odd accidents, empirical facts in themselves, when we suddenly notice something peculiar, a quality rich and strange in an aspect of the world around us. In these moments, it is impossible to say whether it is the perception that animates the object or whether it is something in or behind the object that animates the perception. This ambiguity lies at the heart of symbolism, that uncertain area of study. Symbolism is closely linked to perception because when something in the world animates or is animated by perception, it is then that a symbol comes into being. The examples I have cited of perception in action, the red bird and the cloth mountain, are at the same time accounts of a symbol being incarnated or of perception perceiving in an object its symbolic antecedents. Symbolism, then, is something active, unpredictable, and alive, as opposed to the more static ciphers of allegory. For C.S. Lewis, symbolism and allegory are opposites. On allegory, he writes, you can start with an immaterial fact, such as the passions, which you actually experience, and then can invent visibilia to express them, such as a person called IRA contending with another invented person called patienta. In contrast, symbolism, Lewis argues, works in the exact opposite way. If our passions, being immaterial, can be copied by material inventions, allegory, then it is possible that our material world, in its turn, is the copy of the invisible world. The attempt to read that something else through its sensible imitations, to see the archetype in the copy, is what I mean by symbolism. This occurs with my experience in the studio, when an aspect of the world becomes suffused with a sense of something else, of richness and profound truth. To read that something else through its sensible imitations, in my view, describes the essence of objective painting. When in painting an apple, for example, the archetype is seen in the copy. We perceive the symbol which seems to animate a particular aspect of the world, and in so doing, it brings in an awareness that there is something else, potent but invisible, behind day-to-day experience. The problem here is the term invisible world. It will stick in the throat of the intellect. The skeptic in us will raise an eyebrow and say, oh yes, what world is this? And the perceptor will have no answer, other than to say rather feebly that it feels sometimes as if there is an invisible world somewhere from which symbols, archetypes, and riches come.
Thanks very much, Michael. Mick, perhaps you would care to take it up.
Sorry, I was on mute there. The advantages of inarticulacy. It's a question of whether you trust the sensations you have over and above their plausibility. Cézanne spoke of the importance of his petite sensations. And it is the case that the painter, once he has learnt the trade, relies almost entirely on his sensations as to whether something works. Arising from this, or so it used to be, is the characteristic taciturnity of painters. They do not need words. Their sensations are eloquent enough, and it follows, when perception is honed on a daily basis, that it can reveal things hitherto undreamt of. The effort of active discernment necessary to objective painting clarifies and heightens perceptive power until there is a change of dimension. Perception widens to include all time, or so it seems. The physical aspects of a still life take on a life which is not the painter's. The studio seems to become a place where, to quote Edward Wind, the universal invades the particular. There are times when the painter will be aware of this silent language, but it is often the case that he is absorbed in the task of painting, and he only becomes aware of the mysterious portent of something he has painted long after it has been completed. Montaigne talking of writers, speaks of the poetic flight which the author himself acknowledges to proceed from something else than himself. It is the same with painting, Montaigne continues, for it sometimes happens that touches escape the brush of the artist that so far exceed his conception and his art as to excite his own admiration and astonishment. Montaigne puts his finger on the key element of this mystery when, apropos of certain paintings, he comments on the charm and beauty which enter into them, the works, not only in spite of the intention, but without even the knowledge of the workman. Often the best things happen when our backs are turned, it seems, and mystery, that's something that cannot be explained within the process of painting, is established as empirical fact. The intellect, however, while noting all these things, cannot take part in the sensation. It cannot digest the rapidity and abundance of symbolic life, one definition of which is that the symbol holds several meanings simultaneously. Perception, on the other hand, can comprehend or partake effortlessly in these silent revelations, but it cannot speak of them. And the rule of the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, forbidding those who took part from speaking of what they saw, comes to mind. So mystery and silence are fitting when it comes to these matters, but the intellect cannot help pondering these things, because that is what intellect does. It tries to understand.
Thanks very much. Michael, would you like to continue, please?
Paradox, the dark and the light. This contradictory position, where on the one hand we perceive truths that cannot speak their name, and on the other we endeavor to apply intellectual propriety to these sensations, is expressed memorably by the 3rd century AD Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus. He that would speak exactly must not name it, the ultimate one, by this name or that. We can circle, as it were, about its circumference, seeking to interpret in speech our experience of it, now shooting near the mark, and again disappointed of our aim by reason of the antinomies we find in it. The greatest antinomy arises in this, that our understanding of it is, by a presence higher than all knowing. Hence the word of the master, Plato, that it overpasses speech and writing, and yet we speak and write, seeking to forward the pilgrim upon his journey thither. The essential paradox, or antinomy, is that the intellect cannot know what perception is able to perceive. In Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates refused to dismiss as mere fancies the creatures of myth and religion, centaurs, nymphs, gods, and goddesses, his reason being that as he does not know his own self, how can he be sure of the existence or not of such other things? If we do not know ourselves, then it would behove us to be hospitable to contradiction, as many other great thinkers of the past have been. Peter van Sittert, in his History of England, wrote that in the 16th century, science, religion, and Hermeticism could jostle within the same head. Galileo did not disdain astrology. Blake and Kepler dabbled in it. Newton, profoundest thinker of Europe, respected certain branches of alchemy and the magic properties of numbers, from which Pythagoras himself had not escaped. In the Age of Enlightenment, Goya, on the title page of his etching series Los Caprichos, wrote the famous line, "The sleep of reason brings forth monsters." This enigmatic statement can be interpreted in 2 ways, as Kenneth Clark observed. Either that when we abandon the discipline of reason, we become monstrous in our behavior, or that even when we try to follow reason, when we sleep, our dreams show that we are still haunted by fears and terrors of a kind which have haunted the human imagination throughout history. Jung encouraged the study of the darker, unknown areas of ourselves, which became known as the unconscious within the discipline of psychoanalysis. Jung described psychoanalysis as a shining of a light into a darkness that could harbor riches as well as terrors. In other words, by talking in a clinical setting and by recollecting dreams, the obscure terrors and destructive impulses that haunt us are made more visible, thus enabling us to understand better what is disturbing us, thereby leading us to a more balanced and less destructive life. As regards the negative aspects of the unconscious, that can so damage our lives. Jung's strategy was akin to the military dictum of know thy enemy, but for Jung, the unconscious was also the source of good things. Like Plato's black and white horses, the unconscious could release fair as well as foul, and the shining of the light could open a window on the latest richness of our nature, encouraging inspiration and energy. But key to Jung's practice was the application of reason, or rather, the study of the irrational by the rational. The subject of this essay, the duality of perception and the intellect, deals with the same essential reality that artistic practice has to be open to what is known and what is unknown. The vital energy, the perceptive triggers, come from we know not where, and Jung's definition of the unconscious was simply everything that which we have no knowledge of. And yet the intellect is endeavoring to find things out, is sometimes able to plant the perception with a resulting increase in vigor and permanence that is discussed earlier in the essay. And a balance has to be found between the unpredictable, fugitive nature of perception and a steady working practice through which the unknown can transpire. As C.S. Lewis said, he who does his own work well will do work he never dreamed of.
Thank you. I'll continue. Apollo and Marsyas. I mentioned earlier Socrates' refusal to disavow the centaurs and other supernatural inhabitants of myth and religion, which he is urged to do by his companion Phaedrus. His refusal stems, I suggest, from his recognition that such fantasy is actually a very real part of ourselves. Socrates mocks the over-clever and laborious person who is skeptical about these, the creatures of myth, and tries with his boorish kind of wisdom to reduce each to what is likely. As for me, there's no way I have the leisure for it all, and the reason for it, my friend, is this. I'm not yet capable of knowing myself in accordance with the Delphic inscription. So it seems absurd to me that while I'm still ignorant of this subject, I should inquire into these things which do not belong to me. So then saying goodbye to these things and believing what is commonly thought about them, I inquire not into these, but into myself. Phaedrus, section A of page 229 or 230. Much nearer our own time, J.R.R. Tolkien, with an equal scorn for secular realism, asserted the validity of folk tale and the vitality of fantasy. The maddest castle that ever came out of a giant's bag in a wild Gaelic story is a great more real, he wrote, than the ephemeral products of so-called real life, such as motor cars or fridges. In my view, both Tolkien and Socrates recognized that the imaginative and perceptive powers come from a natural and age-old part of ourselves, without whose vigor we would have none of the myths and tales that have sprung up the world over, and none of the nourishment that these stories bring. The difference between the calm objectivity of reason and intellect and the perceptive vigor of imagination is that the latter is productive. For the painter, beauty does not come into the world through rational debate, and yet reason plays a vital role in beauty's genesis. The good gardener trains and guides, cuts back excessive growth, but he needs the wild energy of nature. Conversely, without the necessary husbandry, the garden swiftly degenerates into overgrowth, darkness, and forlorn wilderness. So painting, without the corrective of reason, will descend into incoherence and vacuity. The life of the mind and the making of art need the cold edge of reason to disentangle, to clarify, to order. But without the vigor and richness of the natural and instinctive part of ourselves, it will become sterile, an academic exercise without warmth and vitality. All would be explainable and all would be dull. Myth of the playing of Marsyas is both an example of the richness that the human mind is capable of, and is also useful in expanding on the contrast between the intellect and perception that is the theme of this essay. The story, like most myths, is simple yet bizarre, not to say baffling. Marsyas, a satyr, half man, half beast, finds the flute discarded by Athena because the playing of it distorted her features. He challenges Apollo to a musical contest on condition that the victor could do what he liked with the vanquished. The Muses decide in favor of Apollo, who bound Marsyas to a tree and flayed him alive. His blood was the source of the river Marsyas. In Edgar Vinn's elucidation of this gloomy mystery, pagan mysteries in the Renaissance, based on Raphael's painting of the subject, the classic interpretations focus on the opposition between the heavenly and the earthly, between a god and a satyr, half man, half beast, representing the vital powers of nature. Vinn speaks of the closely juxtaposed glory and agony in Raphael's painting, as Marsyas faces the victorious god, who issues a command to have him flayed. In Ovid's account, Marsyas awaits his living death and cries to Apollo, "Why do you tear me from myself?" Metamorphoses. Marsyas is wind. Marsyas, wind, writes, was a follower of Bacchus, and his flute was the Bacchic instrument for arousing the dark and uncontrollable passions that conflict with the purity of Apollo's lyre. The musical contrast between Apollo and Marsyas was therefore concerned with the relative powers of Dionysian darkness and Apollonian clarity. And if the contest ended with the flaying of Marsyas, it was because flaying was itself a Dionysian rite, a tragic ordeal of purification by which the ugliness of the outward man was thrown off and the beauty of his inward self revealed. Much of the material of this essay seems to be embodied in this myth. The conflict between the earthly passions of Marsyas's flute and the purity of Apollo's heavenly lyre seem to become, in artistic experience, interwoven and mingled. Perception, which appears to have heavenly powers of discernment and clarity beyond the power of speech, is also instinctive and alive with intoxicating richness and an almost animal vigor, like the rapid affoliation of spring or the leap of a wild creature. Hence it seems to have both Apollonian and Dionysian traits. Likewise, intellect and clarity of reason, traditionally the gift of Apollo, the sky god from whom order, civilization, and the arts spring, take on more earthbound characteristics. The airborne impetuosity of perception needs to be followed by the slower intellect, ordering, researching, recognizing affinities. Once again, the image that springs to mind is of the intellect as garden, and it is in his garden that perception needs to find its parent soil and archetypical forebears. For only then will a sense of completeness or unity be experienced. Above all, the myth brings to life in the starkest terms the two opposites that have always run through human nature and art. The need for clarity, reason, and order, but contrasts with the equally important need for richness, the progenitive darkness of the earth, proliferating abundance of nature. In short, the unpredictable versus the stable, the wild versus the civilized. The myth also shows the ancient desire for release from a mortal limitation, escape from the self into something larger that is at the root of the artistic impulse, and also the cleansing or purgation that we long for, despite knowing that it will be both pleasure and pain. As Vind points out, the cry of Marsyas, why do perhaps you tear me from myself, expresses then an agonized ecstasy and could be turned, as it was by Dante, into a prayer addressed to Apollo. Enter my breast and so infuse me with your spirit, as you did Marsyas when you tore him from the cover of his limbs. Dante's words highlight the violence inherent in the artistic venture. The sense that we are too small, with limitations that must be ripped away in order for inspiration to flow. That there is a hopeless disproportion between mortal frailty and godlike universality. Thus, there is a triple action to the myth: the clash between the god and the mortal half-animal man, which results in the evisceration of the man, but then also his salvation, and his inner purity, or the immortal that is in him, is released in the river that flows from him. The latent potency of the myth has attracted many painters. One of the greatest interpretations was Titian's. In the painting, as Apollo kneels down to a gruesome act of flaying, we perceive bewilderedly that this is a bittersweet occasion, tragic yet festive, with musicians looking on as they blithely and cheerfully play on their viols, while Apollo, intent on his grim task, is also benign and merciful. The surging god leading us through pain of death to joy and celebration. There is the sense that the god has come down to this woodland scene to cut with his clarifying knife through confusion and excessive growth, and we are suddenly allowed glimpses of heaven and snatches of heavenly music, all the more poignant for being heard amidst the rough wildness of a tangled wood. It is somewhat anticlimactic to return from these profound mysteries to the quiet everyday world of the studio, but the fathomless antiquity of the myth and its beauty, both frightening and hopeful, painful and sweet, is based on the same pairing of opposites explored in this essay. Heavenly and earthly, reason and instinct taken to the ultimate conclusion, that in death we will find our ultimate release. That release, as has been said, is the third element in the action of the myth. In the clash of opposites, something new is born. From Marsyas' death, a river flows, the waters, in Ovid's account, are the clearest in the land. In the wrestling of contending forces of ardor and objectivity, richness and clarity, art, something new from ancient stock, comes into being. And so art, in its true role, echoes or distantly rehearses mortality. Something new is born from us who will pass away. If art is a release from the contradictory nature of man, so this prefigures death, which can be seen as the final release. And although it might seem as an overreach to be considering such profound matters in an essay that sets out to examine day-to-day artistic practice, these matters inevitably crop up in any serious consideration of artistic practice. Why, if it were not meant to portray the dilemma of mortality and being human, did art come into being in the first place? Well, surely the wellspring of art is to leave something behind, something so well wrought and beautiful that it defies time, and will centuries later be still there, still new, the contending imperatives that made it, blent into one strength that does not age or die. Oh, yeah. Any thoughts about that? Do you think it was overwritten? Do you think it should have been stripped down? Michael, you're chuckling. Please.
I think you just summed it up. Yeah, I think it is overwritten. It could have been slimmed down, and it's fascinating. I request that you send me a copy of it because I'd like to read it again more carefully. What always kept striking me was I was thinking of music, and to me it's the same kind of dilemma. I mean, you perceive it and you intellectually analyze it, but I think basically with music you're simply listening to it. I don't know if you're, I mean, I listen to various pieces which supposedly have a story, but I don't relate to the story at all. I just think of the music and follow and enjoy the music. And
Well, Michael, do you not feel with music though, these vibrations in the air seem to have a profound meaning, which may not be easily expressed, but that's why one listens to it. There's something there which is, yeah, it goes beyond the superficial sounds.
I don't know if I would use the word meaning for that. I'm not sure what it would be, but I don't think in terms of the sounds, in terms of what they signify or mean. I just take in the overall composition, rhythms, melodies, and on this whole permanency of art, I immediately started thinking of drama and music. And they're not permanent. They're something that you experience at the moment, and really at the moment only. You might have another experience of a Shakespearean play at another point, or listen to a Beethoven sonata at another point, but the actual experience exists only in that moment. And so I don't know if there's a permanency there that would compare to the visual art that Sangster is describing.
Mm-hmm. Heward, you please.
I think with Michael, the thinking in the essay is decidedly blurred. It could have done with a great deal of philosophical clarification. It's right in the territory of what I was looking at in relation to Kant, Heidegger, and Strawson. Kant says that intellect without intuition is blind, is dumb, and intuition without intellect is blind. And Kant comes up with the imagination as the bridging conception between intellect or reason, concept, and experience, intuition.
What do you think he could have done in regard to clarifying that would have helped strengthen the essay?
Let me give you an example which Wittgenstein brings up for the opposite purpose, but which seems to me very clear-cut. Wittgenstein answers the simple question: try and describe the taste of coffee. And he says it can't be done. And in effect, he says there's nothing that could be done. But that's actually not true. Whether it's the taste of coffee, the taste of wine, or the taste of whiskey, what we actually do, if you read the writings of wine tasters and whiskey tasters, is to use analogies. So you find some strange remarks like, this particular malt had a faint aspect of burnt tires.
Mm-hmm.
And I no longer drink alcohol, but when I used to go to the Scottish Malt Whisky Society, you could taste the wine, the whiskey, and you would think, what the hell do they mean by burnt tires? And then you tasted it, and you suddenly thought, yeah, that's right. That's as near as you can get to the particular flavor of this taste. So, and that's what they do.
What's the point you're making in relation to the essay? He does talk on the inevitability of the meaning of it, something. Yeah.
The point I'm making is that there are two aspects of it. The first aspect is that the most ordinary experience is not directly translatable into language, on the one hand, but on the other hand, language through analogy and metaphor enables us to develop all sorts of descriptive devices, whether it's vision, whether it's music, and whether it's a tactile experience in sculpture, and so on and so forth. And we are not totally at a loss to describe things. Yet the whole premise of that essay is that there's an intrinsic and irreversible indescribability that applies to perceptual experience, or what Kant calls intuition. And I think if you actually analyze the situation, it boils down to something much more ordinary and commonsensical. And that means that we are not, as it were, lost in this welter of confusion, which the essay leaves us with.
I would disagree with that, because I mean, he does touch upon how difficult it is sometimes to identify the meaning of something, but in relation to this strange mountain shape that he found pleasing in the still life, he does write and quote quite extensively Milton to try to represent his what he felt was what made it significant for him. So by the fact of attempting to describe the undescribable, so to speak, he is doing what you're doing by analogy. So I don't think he's saying that that's not possible. He's actually doing that in the essay. But Janine, what did you think? Did you enjoy it or find it?
Well, of course, I loved it. I'm not quite sure. Let me just reference first of all what Michael said about music, and by way of analogy, let me just say that my son-in-law and my daughter are watching this television program, and it's called Grimm, and it has all this stuff from the Brothers Grimm fairy tales and stuff in it. And there's a character in there, and the character's name is he's a Blutbaden, and they don't know what that means. And I said, do you understand that means bloodbath? It's translated into German as that. Well, they sit there and they go, really? Because why? It depends on a range of experience. And I think this is what the essay is getting at, is that your experience of art, music, drama, painting, pantomime, paper mache, sandcastles, depends on your frame of reference, whatever that may be. And it's universal, but it's also particular to individuals. What you were saying about listening to music, there was a piece of music, Ode to Joy, that was in another television program. And my children are sitting there watching this, and I said, you do realize that when Beethoven wrote Ode to Joy, he was deaf. And they said, really? By knowing that, and his literary group, story is everything, right? This is what we do. We read stories and things that other people have written and take from them, whatever it is that we do. But knowing that a deaf person could do something like that, a grand work that has survived the test of time, as our writer says, you leave something behind. But knowing the story behind the performance enhances that to where this piece of music is now raised from, gee, that sounds pretty, to, oh my God, really? How is it possible for a deaf person to hear something like that and write it and have people perform it and love it and over and over again? And I
all love it.
Right. And
All right.
I think that's what the writer is getting at. Now, he takes a circuitous route to say it, but the ineffable quality of art, you know, I don't know art, but I know what I like. Well, actually, you probably like it for a reason that you may not understand on a conscious level. And I think that's what the essay is about. My question about, for you, Stead, about the composer of both the artistic and the essay, how does he feel about modern art, where the intellect?
Well, he's a modern artist, I suppose. He's producing it. How do you, by modern art, what do you mean?
Well, his still life, okay, that you showed us.
Yeah.
We know an apple, we see it. So in that sense, it's real. We can tell an apple from the pot, from the tablecloth, from the mouth. Everything that we can put together from that picture represents something else, right? He says that the tablecloth is a mountain. Well, other people may not see that depending on their experience. And I think that's the experience, Haywood, that he's referring to in terms of what you were talking about, the coffee. Your experiences, and the more of them you have, the broader your field of background in literature and these things contribute to your appreciation of what it is that you hear, you see, you watch performed, as opposed to someone who has not had those experiences. And to just, and I'll end on this note, to prove the point, if you go into, say, Muslim neighborhoods, show me the art, the music, the paintings, the performances, Paradise Lost, the mythology. What do we have in that culture? We, in our culture, Western culture, believe it's worth saving. Other cultures, in my way of thinking, are deprived of the appreciation of what this man is talking about. That's, and I think you're right. It's overwritten in the sense that for an educated audience, but for an uneducated audience, they will go and look this stuff up, hopefully, and learn more about mythology and stuff. So.
The main thing, main value of the essay is that I think it allows one to enter the mind of a painter and to perceive the still life as not just being about a few random objects put together, but having some connection with something universal. And that, I think, is a great value, because it that is what a great still life has. It does have a resonance just beyond the particularities of the objects, and it harks back to some mysterious idea of the one, or beauty that exists before objects are differentiated. But Mick, you've read all sorts of stuff. What was your
not having the essay in front of me, there was so much to take in, to be honest. You know, that it's difficult to comment in depth, I think. But I think we're almost talking something about almost like platonic forms, though, aren't we?
He does make reference to that, certainly, and that thinking is underlying it.
Yeah, and going back to what Michael said about listening to music in the moment, I mean, that's something that's been discussed, I think, quite a lot, because if we were just listening to music in the moment, it'd just be a series of arbitrary sounds. But there's obviously some kind of inbuilt structural receptor in the human brain, or within, you know, a certain culture, you know, within a culture, you know, a genital cultural kind of transmission. I remember, I think it was Alexander Dugin. I wasn't reading a book. I remember editing a book by him. It was a long time ago, and he talks about music, and he said, obviously, to make sense of music, we need to not just be listening to the exact split second of when a note's being played, but we also need to have in our head at the same time the series of notes that's, you know, preceded it, and also maybe have an expectation of what's going to come next, in order to that we kind of see this as harmony, but he's taken that to an extreme. He said ultimately, when we talk about this, we're kind of looking at a kind of interrogation of the concept of time, and that music can kind of liberate the mind from this forward motion and almost suggest a reversibility of time. In some, you know, a possibility of this in some kind of future, you know, as things progress, you know, this might be the basis of, you know, saying, well, can we reverse time? Because we can obviously do it in our brains, you know. And I mean, I know I've gone completely off the off track on that, but it's just something that Michael said about that, and it's just something I've thought about for quite a long time, you know. In terms of the essay itself, I don't know if it was overwritten because, or you could also say it was underwritten in many ways, because there were some things I thought, well, I wouldn't mind if he kind of extrapolated that a bit more, you know, some of the things he said. And I enjoyed reading it. It was entertaining, listening to it as well as reading it. I don't know if I've got much more to say. I would like to read it again, probably have more time to think about it and digest it.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'll forward to Michael the website, and we can.
Yeah, that'd be good. Definitely.
It'd be good to have a look at his pictures and see them in the light of what he says. And
absolutely, yeah, because he's completely new to me. I'd never heard of the guy, and I'd never seen his paintings or anything.
Yeah, I mean, he's
in education, so
yeah, he's a good person. Michael, what's your thoughts as a man who has strong opinions about all sorts of things? But he's not a doctor, this man, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, I just sort of feel, yes, I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was very original. I mean, the second part of it seemed to be taken completely from Nietzsche's Birth of Travesty Out the Spirit of Music. I mean, I think almost directly. The one thing I think was very much missing was the notion of cultural reference, of analogy, of experience that one must have in order to appreciate a work of art. Particular symbols have a particular association within a culture. There's no kind of mention in what he says of class, of race, of history, and these are not necessarily universal at all. One has a direct association, and that association, I'll give a funny example. I hope Michael doesn't mind my mentioning it. As we were reading that text, and I saw IRA for a split second, I thought, what was the IRA doing here? Of course, it's era. Now, he actually read IRA. And why? Probably because that was such a strong, pregnant experience for people in the 60s and the 70s, that is your first reaction, and that is the reaction to a symbol. And it's meaningless to somebody who hadn't grown up in that context. And a Chinese person who spoke fluent English would almost certainly not have, I think, not have made that association. So that I think when he talks about it, what is missing from his essay is his acceptance of the fact that groups of people, and Janine touched on it, I think, that don't have that experience and can't make that perhaps subconscious analogy, are going to be excluded from it. They are not going to understand it. And maybe that's the same with music, because I've listened to Indian music and I understand nothing. And I can't make a criticism about whether it's good or bad. I have no idea what they're doing, why they're doing it. That's not a criticism of them at all. It simply means I don't have the experience, the upbringing, the instinctive or intuitive response to make any sense of it. And I think that was missing from the essay completely. He obviously didn't want to touch on that.
You thought it was an essential thing in relation to developing some of the Neoplatonic ideas.
I mean, the still life might, for many cultures, be in itself completely meaningless. There has to be a cultural tradition and experience and association that one makes to have any expectancy of some apples on a table. One has to vaguely know what an apple is, you know. And also have the religious, I mean, the symbol of the garden, as Janine mentioned, right? In other religious traditions might not have that meaning that it has for people still brought up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, which is that the garden is the idealized world.
I think that his mindset is that perhaps of earlier times, in that he's assuming he is writing to people who are of a similar type to himself, which I think is quite a legitimate position to take. He's not writing something that is going, I'm not quite sure. I mean, even if we went back I mean,
100 years, somebody might say, well, he hasn't taken into account class. I mean, you don't hear much about Marxist criticism these days, but it had its valid point that there is a class experience and that art reflects that to a certain extent. There's none of that. There's nothing. It's as though we're in some kind of world where there's a universal man. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, how would I mean, maybe I'm sure he has his own views about that, but how is obviously that's those are other dimensions. I don't see that it's a defect in the essay as it stands. It doesn't speak about class because that's a whole nother topic.
I give that as an example, but I think it is a defect that there's no acknowledgement of the need to include the idea of a cultural, historical setting that one reacts to art in a certain way because one belongs to a certain tradition. I think that is a failing of his essay, to be frank.
Okay. Edith, I don't think you've said anything about this.
Oh, yes, I thought it was very good. I'm glad we chose that option and not the Nottingham Forest thing. Yeah, I thought it was a very brave attempt to put into words something that has puzzled humans probably ever since they came down from the trees. About the world beyond. Is there a world beyond us, beyond what we can see, beyond our five senses? And that's all cultures have that, and also I thought he did a good job of sort of describing how the best the best art and probably music and science as well, I think he mentioned science, sort of marries up the ability to focus narrowly on detail, pay attention to detail and sort of that, but at the same time remain cognizant of a much bigger picture of a universal unseen world, which actually neuropsychologist Ian McGilchrist claims to have identified as being the province of the right hemisphere of the brain, whereas the attention to detail and the focus and the reason and the earthbound thing is the province of the left hemisphere of the brain. And the things we admire, whether they're a beautiful bridge or a cathedral or a work of art or a book or a play, the author of them has got an ability. First of all, both halves of his brain are working, very well, but also he's had an ability to marry them up somehow, and not just pay attention.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
And so I think, Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, which is basically an enlarged and scientific version with loads of references of this essay. I mean, it's huge. I haven't read it. It's 2 volumes and it's absolutely massive. But he spends a lot of time on YouTube explaining his book because he knows that nobody's going to read it. But it's an exact description of what this Michael Sangster is trying to get at, and it's just mystified all of us. Really, even quite ordinary people. Not great artists or scientists or whatever. Is well, even just when we think about our dreams or anyway, the world we cannot see, there's things which we cannot see which seem to be important to humans, and we don't know if they're important to other animals, but they would seem not to be. It seems to be only humans that they're important to, but now scientists are making discoveries that, for instance, elephants have certain sort of mystical sort of thoughts or whatever. Anyway, I don't. But no, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was a really brave attempt to grapple with something that Plato and Socrates and Kant and everybody was trying to grapple with, and it's just it's difficult to get your head around, and yet we want to get our head round how we marry up, because it seems important to the way we live our lives. And Ian McGilchrist says we've become far too focused on the seen world, on the attention to detail, logic, reason, we can do this. And he says, in fact, the left hemisphere is the servant of the right hemisphere. So it's the right hemisphere that ought to be in control, because it's got this bigger picture thing. And he says we've kind of almost switched it off.
Just before I pass over to the other Michael, I've just say to Michael about your criticism. This is an essay on his website, the purpose of which mainly is, I think, to give access to his mind in creating the pictures, and that I think it does very well. If it had been submitted as a contribution to a symposium on the meaning of art, in an unqualified sense, I would agree much more with what you're saying. It's very much his point of view. Michael, en France.
First, one thing on elephants. Apparently, they call each other by name. That's a latest thing. And as someone who's about to go out and right after we finish and start working with the weeds in the garden, that part was all highly relevant. But with Hewitt's the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, I used to be a member of that as well, and I always
the same society. You two were in the same society.
Yes, at one point.
Oh, that's nice.
And those descriptions of the burnt tire and all that made I always found that whole realm of describing it fascinating. It's an art in itself, but it never related to the whiskey tasting for me itself. It was something almost separate. They had developed this whole way of describing it, and if I were related to whiskeys, it would be geographical, whether it's an Islay or a Highland or from Orkney. So I didn't see that as ever really connected. It was just sort of an auxiliary art form that had developed. So they had to write about it. They had to be able to describe it. It was meaningless in that sense, enjoyable, but meaningless.
But not to Hewitt, obviously, because he found that association.
Now this fellow that wrote the essay,
Michael Sands, Mike.
Is he a writer as well? In other words, I know
I mean he's written a few bits and pieces. He writes some poetry, but he is a pain.
He needs a good editor. Every writer needs a good editor, and definitely this needs some editing. But is he?
Some of us don't. Mick doesn't think so, and Mick has edited books, so I don't know. I mean, I'm neutral about the subject. I think it's. Yeah, I mean, it flows quite nicely. It's readable.
Yeah.
So it's not a philosophical essay for a philosophical journal. It's something to help people understand paintings, really. I suppose.
But it's a huge topic.
It's a big topic.
He has opened up the biggest topic in the history of mankind, as he references Plato, Socrates. What is the unseen? How does it affect art? How does art tap into it? How does science tap into it? And as Mick said, he said, really, I mean, although it got a bit repetitive, because he's trying to explain something that he knows that everybody can't explain, and is wants to understand but can't explain. So really, it could have been as big as the master and his
I could have gone on and on and on. Absolutely,
2 books of 500 pages each, so 1,000 pages. It could have been, because it is a massive topic. So, and it's not, a personal thing. It's why do we look at a picture, and it taps into something beyond us, beyond words, at the same time as being very detailed, because his pictures in particular are beautifully detailed, but most art is very detailed.
Well, one thing I found really, really relevant personally was when he talked about the artist losing, and I'm paraphrasing, kind of losing himself, and then looking at what he's created and saying, oh, did I really do that? I mean, that's really good. And kind of like stepping back from the production part of it and looking at it objectively and saying, wow, that's really pretty. Because why? I've read stuff that I wrote 10 years ago, and I read it and I go, you know, I don't even remember writing this.
Mm.
It could be age, Janine, think about that. But really, I read it and I think, did I really write that? It doesn't even sound like me. You know, and we all have our own cadence and our vocabularies and whatever. And I could really relate to that. And it sounded to me, the essay sounded to me as though an artist was attempting to write about the thing he knows best, to communicate what he knows to people who may not understand that. And in that sense, I thought it did a pretty good job. Because after reading that, I think, well, you know, I kind of know this guy. And what I meant by the way, by modern art, I meant really abstract art. As opposed to, you know, and
Yeah, I thought you
he's
did.
not
Yeah.
dead, he's alive, so yeah, he's a modern guy, but abstract in terms of, well, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hubert,
yeah.
you've got your
I-
yellow hand raised.
Well, picking up what Janine has just said, I agree that there's a valuable element in what he says about the implicit that can be discovered in a work of art or a piece of writing or a piece of music. And one of the things that annoyed me about the whole essay was that he suggests that the intellect is slow and sluggish and only fit for gardening, as it were. Whereas what is implicit with respect to Michael's portrayal of the pursuit of analogy as a sub-art form, but what is intriguing about what the intellect finds in the implicit communication of something that an artist has created, but which he or she didn't realize was in it, is that the amount of meaning and significance, and I include music in that, that can be found in a Platonic kind of sense in art, which is after all a replicatable process, is quite extraordinary. So that the intellect goes on building and building and building, and there's a dance that the intellect is in with the substance of experience. And it seems to me that the mystification which is implicit in the denigration of the intellect and the constant tendency to describe it as mysterious and unanalyzable is not a good service that he's performed.
Dude, I don't think he denigrates. He's saying the intellect is very important to order and to keep in control and to make seemingly the less
It is dealing with an antithesis, which is a false one.
well,
Yeah.
I don't think he's denigrating either part of the antithesis. They're both sort of, you know, they're both important elements in the process. But if the length of time people need to say something about what we've read indicates the worth of the piece to be read, then I think today's selection is justified. Because we all had something to say about it, and it
Yes,
was
I think we can all agree to that.
yeah. It was
Oh, instead, that says something about us as well.
yes, indeed. But I mean, sometimes people don't have we don't have so much to say about something. So I think it touched on important issues in a brave way, and the paintings were good. I think. That's my belief. Now for July, we can read this continually continue being to a put off treat or so-called
The
of
deferred enjoyment.
yeah,
I'd say.
deferred. Yeah, that's the word. Thank you. Yeah, deferred. Defer it once more.
With curiosity stimulated.
Yeah, we can do that in July, and that's a straightforward thing to do.
What date will that be?
Well, we have no fixed date.
When would suit you, Heward? Are you going away in July at all?
Yes, so the I can't remember what the dates will be, but if it's the 21st or something like that,
That is a Sunday. Yeah.
in flight. So if it could be the one before, then I'll be able to attend.
Or the one after, maybe.
No, because the one after I'll still be away.
Oh, okay, sometime around the 21st or something.
If it doesn't suit other people, that's
Like the 14th is a Sunday.
yes, I think the 14th would do it.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah,
All right. For all the Sundays, all right for me.
I think so. I think that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
So are we picking the 14th or what?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Should we do? Yeah.
Okay, well, Sed, don't tell me what it is then.
No, I won't. I won't.
Coming up so soon. I thought it might not come up for a year or something.
Maybe, yeah.
I can wait a month, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Well, I should hope so. Good. And Michael, I'll forward you the link to the website, and you can perhaps send it out in a posting. Michael, would you do that? Michael in Cologne, yeah, to all members, you know.
Oh, if you send that to me, for sure.
Yeah, so people can look at the essay and have another paintings. I think that's
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you mean with the attachments as well then? Or...
Well, yeah, it's just a website, so
okay, fine.
The essays can be found, and you know.
Yep, I'll do that. No problem at all.
And of course, if anyone wants to communicate with him, no doubt that's possible there. Good. Oh, well, thanks everyone so much for giving up your time on Sunday afternoon to read this piece of writing about an important thing, namely what goes behind what lies behind paintings, which I think is very important.
Great fun today. That's
yeah, it's good. Yeah. Always good to see you. Thanks so much. When are you coming back to London?
November, December, something like that.
All right. Oh, okay. So we've got to wait until then to see you. Okay, fair enough.
Unless you want to come down here.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, who knows? I might sort of painting.
You're always welcome.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. All right, lovely to see everyone. So have a good month.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.